Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us tonight for our postgraduate webinar. My name is Basha. I'm an Education USA advisor here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission in London. Just so you are aware, this webinar will be recorded and will be available for you to view later this week. Today, I'll be talking about studying for a postgraduate degree in the US, reasons why you might want to do that, how to think about universities in the US, and then how to choose them and what the process looks like. And I'll also be talking about funding US education and the application process. And I will take questions at the end of the webinar, but if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please pop them in the Q&A box. Okay, so what is Education USA? Education USA is an advisory service that is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network with over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And the advising centers help international students with information on how to study in the USA and how to figure out about that process. Here in England, we're based at Education US, or the Education USA Center is based at the US-UK Fulbright Commission in London. And the Commission and Education USA are paired up to help people explore education in the US and also at the graduate level to provide awards to graduate students to go to the US as well. And our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. So if your dream is to study in the US, we are here to help you with that. Okay, so why study in the US? Why not stay here in the UK or go somewhere else? Well, the US offers a wide range of choices. So there are over 1,700 universities that offer postgraduate degrees in the US. And that's compared to about 120 here in the UK. So straight away, there's a lot of variety in institutions and also among different academic departments in the US. It gives you an opportunity to internationalize your CV. A lot of employers cite cross-cultural experience as a very attractive quality nowadays. And it's helpful to have the diverse experiences and to demonstrate independence necessary to study abroad. It allows you to form global networking. US universities give you an unparalleled opportunity to create global networks, not only with the American faculty at the university, and the institutions, but also with the diverse colleagues which make up many US universities. You also get a lot of practical experience. So there are many opportunities for hands-on research, internships, and teaching opportunities at US universities during your postgraduate studies. You could expand your horizons. Obviously, you'll be living and studying in another country. You could expand your worldwide view, and you may expand the opportunities available to you in the future. There's also a lot of funding opportunities, which might surprise some of you, but this is a final reason to study in the US. It's actually the funding opportunities that are available. There are a lot of different funding schemes and scholarships available on the postgraduate level, and I will talk about those later on today. So what are the key differences between the US and the UK? So one of the main differences is actually the duration. So typically in the US, programs are longer. The master's is usually 2 years long. There are some one-year programs out there, but it's very limited. And the PhDs are between 4 to 6 years long. Now, this again might be less or more, depending on the program you're studying or the department that you're part of. There's also an integrated master's in the PhD in the first year or two of the coursework. Now, those that already have a master's can actually use this time to sharpen their skills or gain more experience teaching or even doing research as an assistant. Typically, a master's is a mandatory component of the degree as well in the US. There's also no pure research degrees, so the programs include coursework even on the postgraduate level. And there's no set fees or standard application deadlines, and this will vary greatly by university and also the department in regards to what the fees are and what the deadlines you will have as well. Postgraduate programs in the US are organized by the department, so it's not organized by the supervisors. And you do not need to know your supervisor beforehand, especially since some programs are more interdisciplinary. And it means that you might actually have multiple supervisors or even a supervising committee. And you do not need to have an in-depth research proposal to submit your application, as they expect you to figure this out throughout the program. Also, law and medicine are both studied at the postgraduate level in the US. So what does the timeline in applying look like? So we recommend that you begin researching programs about 12 to 18 months before you plan to enroll. You would then finalize a selection of between 3 to 6 universities to where you will be applying around 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And also around the same time, you want to take any required admissions exams and begin your applications. Now, about 8 to 10 months before your enrollment, you will put together an application and then submit it according to the different deadlines. Around 4 to 7 months beforehand, so before your enrollment in the spring, you can expect to hear back from the universities you apply to with their admissions decision. And based off of where you are accepted, you should notify the universities of your decision and then apply for your student visa 1 to 3 months before enrollment. We have a lot of resources on our website to help you with your pre-departure, including things like travel advice, living arrangements, what the campus life looks like, etc. And you would typically start studying in the US around mid-August to early September, which is actually slightly earlier than here in the UK, where you would typically start mid to late September. Okay, so how do you go about choosing a program? As I mentioned, there are over 1,700 institutions that offer postgraduate programs. So there are a lot of options, and each institution and each department in that institution will be completely different. So how do you go about narrowing down where you actually want to apply? Well, the term that we like to focus on a lot at Fulbright Commission is the idea of fit. And what this means is we want for students to find a program that is really going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. So the first step in the choosing process is actually to locate factors that are important to you and make a list of what will really matter to you. What are some of your non-negotiables? Make sure that you don't just look at universities that you have heard of straight away, because ones that you've seen or heard in movies or programs, or ones that have the highest rankings, as it might mean that you miss out on some great universities and programs that you might never have heard of. So what are some of the factors to consider when choosing a program? First thing you could look at is the type of institutions that are out there. So do you want to go to a public university or a private university? Maybe you want to go to a large university, or maybe you're someone that wants to be somewhere where the university is quite small with not a lot of students. You also want to look at the program type. So at the postgraduate level, this is arguably the most important factor. It's even more important than the institution itself. Things you might want to consider are things like your career goals, qualifications that you want to get, and any concentrations you might be interested in. Maybe you want to be in a program with funded internship opportunities, or maybe you want to be in a program where you could get grant writing experience. So think about what you want from your program experience from the start. Another thing to look at are the academic departments at US universities. So choosing the right department is almost as important as choosing the right university at the postgraduate level. This will influence so much of your experience in the US. So at the postgraduate level, academic departments generally handles the admissions, they design the course structure for the students, and they also monitor the students' progression throughout the program. So it's essential to research the department to find the right academic home for you that also meets those factors. Now, keep in mind that in the US, the departments can vary drastically, even at each individual university. And they could vary in things like areas of faculty expertise, the elective courses and concentrations they have on offer, whether they are tightly focused or more interdisciplinary. They will vary in size and even the atmosphere, and they might vary in the opportunities for you to teach or research or even go to conferences or have chances to go on internships or take part in internships. Another factor to consider is the location. So the US is a massive country that spans across 6 different geographic zones. So you might want to look at things like, do you want to be at an urban area or rural? What kind of climate do you want to live in? Do you want to have 4 seasons, or would you prefer to be somewhere where it's warm majority of the year? Or do you like the cold? You might want to look at access to transportation options. Will you be able to get around? Would you need to get a car? Or maybe you want to look at centers of excellence in your field. For example, if you're doing political science, you might want to look at Washington, D.C. Or if you're doing finance, you maybe want to look and study in New York. And another thing to look at are the extracurricular opportunities in the US. So US campuses are known for their extracurricular opportunities and their lively campuses. Are there any clubs that you want to be a part of? If that's important to you, definitely look at those as well. And the last factor to consider is finances. Now, I will talk more in depth about funding later in the webinar, but if funding is important to you, then this needs to be part of your choosing process right from the start. A lot of the times, funding, especially funding from universities, is actually awarded and applied for alongside the application process. So you don't want to start thinking about funding after you've applied and been accepted, as at that point, it might already be too late. And I wouldn't want for you to be disappointed later down the line. So we always say follow the money at the Fulbright Commission. And so if you need funding to pursue your postgraduate study in the US, make sure that you look for those opportunities from the start. Okay, so with that in mind and so many different factors to consider, how do you go about narrowing down your options? So our website actually has a page on choosing a university at the postgraduate level, and it includes a list of links that are to helpful search engines, for example, the Petersons or gradschool.com. And using those search engines, you could actually start narrowing down your options from the 1700 that's out there. Another way to narrow down your options is actually to contact maybe previous professors that you know to see whether they have any advice for you or options on schools that could be a good fit for you. Maybe you could contact other professionals or colleagues in your field, or even contact the school in your discipline to see if they'll be a good fit and if you could narrow it down a little bit further. Think through the work of scholars you have previously read. Is there anyone you have identified as doing the kind of research that you might want to do? Maybe find out where they're teaching or what their colleagues are working on. And you want to narrow down your choice of universities to about 10 or so to research even further. Okay, so this is an example of the Peterson search engine that's linked on our website. And this is a helpful tool to decide and rank what factors are important to you in choosing a university. So for example, I will use this tool to look for graduate level schools and programs in a particular field. So in this case, I'll be looking up programs in anthropology. So as you can see, the search engine pulls up results of different universities within different departments or programs in anthropology in all of the United States. And on the left side bar, you could actually select a variety of different factors like location, tuition fees, school size, the degree type, so whether it's a master's or a PhD. And you could use the different factors to narrow down the list even further. Okay, so once you narrow your choice to about 10 universities of interest, you should research them further on the university website and actually reach out to them directly as well. The goal is to select about 3 to 6 institutions where you will actually submit an application. And to narrow down your options, we actually advise that you look on each university's website. This is where you could find more information on their faculty. A lot of them even list the CVs of the faculty members. They will list their research interests and a list of their publications as well. And they could also provide contact information for specific professors to reach out to. So it's important that you find out if they're still working on something, maybe that interests you. So if you go there, if they're still going to be there. You might also want to reach out to current graduate students, and this will give you valuable insight into their experience as a graduate student at that particular university or at that particular department. A lot of universities have Zoom calls that you could book with current students or even drop in for something called Zoom coffee session, where a lot of postgraduate students, current postgraduate students meet with potential postgraduate students to kind of talk about their university experience. And this is a good way to find out what kind of projects they are working on. You know, things like what the relationship between the professors and graduate students is at that university, how close they are with their supervisors, what is the campus culture like at their university, or even more broad questions like what the what the local area is like, and how to find a good apartment, what the cost of living is like in that area. So just questions that you might want to find out about the university directly from the students. You could also reach out to the departments, which can usually put you in touch by email with a current student, and that could help you determine what it's like to study there as well. Okay, so now that you've narrowed down the options, let's talk about funding. So funding is one of the top things we get asked about. And there's a big misconception about funding that the US is always more expensive. But there is some good news, as there is a significant amount of funding available on the postgraduate level, and particularly if you are willing to be flexible and go into this whole process with an open mind. So where is this money, magical money at? So there are basically 4 types of funding for the US for study in the US. So the first one is personal and family funds. So there is a big culture in the US of actually saving and paying for university in a way that we don't have here in the UK because we have the loan-based system here. And there is an expectation that you will make some sort of contribution to your studies. Another source of funding in the US is the actual university itself. And this is the best resource for funding, as it doesn't have to be paid back. There are 2 most common types of university-based funding. So the first one is fellowships. And this is outright grants that allow recipients to focus solely on their own work. So the university gives you grant money. And the second one is assistantships. And these are offered in return for services provided to the department. So either things like teaching, research, lab supervision, or working in a campus office. And this will be in exchange for fees waiver, health insurance, and sometimes even a stipend. Now, assistantships are renewable year to year if the student maintains specific academic standards. And the terms of assistantships will vary dramatically between universities and even between departments. So these will be dependent on available grants, also the field and the department need as well. So it's always important to ask the department or program about this kind of funding when you're choosing where to apply and find out how it works as well. More funding also in the US is generally available for PhDs and students in the research-focused masters than for professional degree students. Now, this also varies by subject area. So, for example, the sciences tend to receive more funding than programs in the humanities, for example. It's important that you actually check with multiple offices about funding opportunities. Make sure you check with the department and the graduate school if the school has one, and also the financial aid office as well. Another source of funding are external funding bodies. So external funding bodies provide niche scholarships, and these are institutions that are completely separate to the universities. So they're usually companies, charities, or foundations such as the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And the last source of funding is loans. Now, most US lenders will require a US citizen to co-sign on the loan. And most UK citizens take out private loans from a UK bank. However, we would highly encourage you to examine the terms and interest rates closely, as most likely you will have to start paying it back before you graduate. Now, if you are an American or a dual US-UK citizen, you could take out a loan from a US lender, and you could also apply for US federal loans through something called FAFSA. Now, keep in mind that both university and external funding is actually the preferred option, since this money does not have to be paid back. So it's money that you receive for free. Okay, so now that you're aware of the sources of funding, we advise that you consider a funding strategy to try and to lower costs and manage expenses. Now, you might think of three different approaches. So the first one is that you could reduce the cost of living. So rural versus urban. Living in a rural area will be less expensive than in an urban area. So things like looking at regional costs, same as here in the UK. London is a lot more expensive than living in Lancaster. In the US, living in New York and LA will be way more expensive than states like Ohio or Michigan or somewhere in the middle of the states. Another thing you could look at is to lower the tuition costs. So public universities in the US, meaning they are state funded, generally will have lower costs than private universities. However, keep in mind that private universities might actually have more funding available. And like I mentioned before, the funding will vary by department within each university. So it's important that you do that research and check what's available for you to access. Now, you could also look for university funding in addition to the ways we've already talked about, and you could seek funding outside of your program. So, for example, if you're studying architecture with an interest in environmental architecture and perhaps you want to make buildings more green, you could actually seek funding from two different departments. So it's important to check that information as well. Now, you might not necessarily be able to use all of these strategies in one go. You might find that universities with a lower tuition fee actually have fewer funding opportunities. So beware of the different factors at play and make sure that you do your research. So here's an example of a funding strategy and looking at attending different universities in a specific area and comparing their costs. So for example, here I'm looking at two universities in Boston. Now, Boston University's cost of attendance in the Department of Education and Human Development is over $85,000 with tuition, room and board, and other fees. Now, if I compare that to an MA at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, the tuition and off-campus finances are actually $40,000 less. So these are both universities in the same city, but they actually have a great variance in the tuition and fees. So make sure when you're doing that research, you actually stay open-minded and you look at those different factors and different funding opportunities as well, and also the costs. So sometimes the close universities will also have links with each other and relationships, and you might be able to take classes at Boston University whilst at University of Massachusetts. So also look at that as well when you're doing your research. Okay, now I'd like to take a little look at a few examples of how to identify funding opportunities. So for university funding, the best resource is actually the university website. So make sure you look at the department, the graduate school, and the financial aid pages. Make sure you check out all three because in some cases, not all the funding opportunities are advertised centrally. So you might find different opportunities on the department website, on the financial aid pages, and also on the graduate school website. Make sure you check what they say. Do they actually have much funding available? Universities generally try to give you an accurate but a conservative measure of how much funding they offer. And if this information isn't available online, it might actually suggest that they can't offer a lot of financial support. But it's always worth getting in touch with the department administrator or the director to actually inquire and double check. Make sure you think about whether you will be a competitive applicant for funding at that particular institution as well. So ask current students, if possible, how competitive funding really is and what their assistantships involves, what the work-life balance is like. Try to kind of get the inside scoop of what it looks like. Try to find out how many assistantships there are available and if they are full or partial as well. And if possible, find out on what basis they award assistantships at those universities. It's important to find out if an admissions exam score is factored into this, or if it's more on the basis of your other academics or maybe even prior experience. Find out if there are any extra requirements that you need to fulfill to be considered for an assistantship as well. Some universities will automatically consider you for an assistantship, but in some cases, you might need to submit an additional essay or resume or a separate application as well. Now, I will show you an example of what to look for on university's website and what it looks like as well. So this is the website for the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and this is a top public research university. Now, I have highlighted some key points in their section about fellowships and assistantships and how to identify when a university has funding available. So as you can see, most universities who are generous with funding will actually make it quite obvious on their website. And in the Department of Political Science at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, they note that most students in their department are supported by fellowships and assistantships. It also explains that duties typically range from 10 to 15 hours per week, and it lists what type of duties you could expect to do. It also mentions the eligibility for a variety of fellowships that they have on offer, and it notes that Chapel Hill has a low cost of living. So you could see that here 2 points of the funding strategy exist. So both university funding is available and there's a lower cost of living. Now, here are some examples of scholarships from external funding bodies. So these are non-university scholarships, and they could be part or full funding as well. So there are different resources for exploring external funding scholarships. There's a lot of online scholarship searches. We have a lot listed on our website postgraduate guide as well. And you could use these searches to help narrow down thousands of scholarships that are available based on various factors. And it allows you to find out more information about the eligibility as well. Now, make sure that you actually refer to the funding body's website for information about the application process and deadlines as well. And as you could see, there are many different non-university scholarships funding available out there. You got the Frank Knox Fellowship, the British Friends of HBS, obviously the Fulbright Commission offers one, there's BUNAC. So there's various external scholarships available as well. You just have to search for them. So another example of an external scholarship, as I mentioned, is the Fulbright Awards. Now, this is funding that's available for UK students to study and conduct research in the US, and also vice versa at the postgraduate level. There's a number of the number of awards actually fluctuates each year. The applications are currently open for the 2025-26 enrollment, and the deadline is the beginning of May. So this might actually be before you have even applied to universities, which is completely fine. There's a variety of awards that are available. So some are for your first year only. Other partners awards are actually fully funded for all the years. So make sure you check out our website for more details about the scholarships available. And the scholarships also offers the IIE placement model, which actually provides more generous funding and support with finding the right university as well. If you have any specific questions about the Fulbright scholarships, you could email programs@fulbright.org.uk, or there's a lot of information available on our website as well. Okay, so a final funding tip as I wrap up information about funding. Applying for funding often happens simultaneously to the admission process, so make sure you begin searching for funding early on and alongside when you're searching for the right program at the university for you. Make sure that you're willing to put in the time and effort to seek out and apply for funding opportunities as well. Scholarships will not find you themselves, so you need to investigate university funding, and take the time to actually search for the often niche external scholarships that are available as well. Make sure that you are flexible in choosing the universities you apply to. If it's essential for you to receive funding to complete your postgraduate study, make sure that you choose departments with a lot of funding or where you are a competitive or a top student. Exam scores and grades of last year's admitted students are sometimes available on the university website, so you might want to check that out and see how you compare to the current student cohort. For university funding, the best resource is the actual university website. So once again, make sure you check out the department website, the graduate school website, and the financial aid pages. Check all three, just in case the funding opportunities are not advertised centrally. So you make sure that you check out all three sources as well. And another thing to keep in mind is that you can typically work on campus up to 20 hours a week during term time and 40 hours a week during holiday. But these expected earnings cannot be calculated for visa purposes when you show proof of funds. But that's just something to keep in mind as well. Okay, So now that we've discussed the choosing process and how to determine your fit at a particular university and program, and we looked at funding your studies as well, let's have a look at what completing an application looks like. And here, once again, I'd like to reiterate that doing that in-depth research in the choosing process is so important. And when you get familiar with the programs you're looking at, you can then put together the most competitive application possible for them. And the more competitive your application, the better chances you are at securing more funding. So the more time that you actually spend in the research process, the more benefit it will bring you in the application and funding process as well. So in this section, I'm going to bring you through the main components of completing an application and what those components look like. So what are the US universities look for? To be honest, especially at the postgraduate level, the detail is going to vary depending on the program. So applying for an MBA versus molecular physics is going to be completely different, and they will look at different things as well. Now, US universities look for academic achievement, which will be measured by your undergraduate degree, or if applicable, a postgraduate degree results, and they will also look at admissions test scores. Most universities want to see at least a 2.2 on a bachelor's degree, and you can actually contact individual departments on programs about whether your qualifications are sufficient to be considered for admissions as well. Most universities will not give you strict entry requirements, but they should be able to give you an approximate idea of whether your academic profile is roughly in line with the usual admitted student. So it's also always worth to check. They will also look at academic fit. So they will look at what your reasons are for pursuing a postgraduate degree at their institution and how it will actually help you towards your goals. They will look at things like any relevant work experience or relevant coursework, and they will also look at extracurricular involvement as well. US universities want to see a pattern of relevant work and study experience that lie a strong academic and practical foundation for your studies. And they want to see your ability and interest in being involved both in and outside the classroom as well. So US campuses, as I mentioned before, are very lively places, and they want to see the personality of their applicants coming out in the application process. Some universities may also want to know why you want to study in the US specifically and why not in the UK. So in terms of the actual application components, there's no standard process for applications, and this will vary by university. Each university will set its own deadlines and application requirements as well. So it's important you check what when those deadlines are and what the requirements are as well. Most applications will follow a similar format, and you'll be able to reuse or maybe adapt some of the materials that you prepare for each university. Most applications will include an actual application form with your basic information and demographics, admission test scores. These will be sent to the university by the organization that administered the test. They will ask for a transcript or list of your academic marks. And you can usually ask your department, university, or registrar's office for a transcript of your undergrad or master's documents. They will ask for a personal statement. So this will describe your academic interest, professional and personal goals, and any relevant experience. It will also give you an opportunity to put forth any personal history or context and kind of sell yourself to the program. They will ask for 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. The universities may provide loose guidelines for the recommendation letters and for selecting your referees, but a lot of the time they ask for a letter from an academic or professional referee as well. Make sure for your referees, you choose someone that knows you well, both in and out of the classroom as well, so they could showcase you as a whole person, not just a student or not just someone outside the classroom as well. Some universities might ask for a CV or a resume, which is a list of your professional and extracurricular accomplishments. And you might be able to, you might be asked to do an interview. Now, this is usually required for students applying for an MBA and occasionally for some research degrees too, depending on the program. You might have an audition if you are applying for programs in the arts. And art students may also submit a portfolio of work, while students applying for research-focused degrees may be asked to submit a writing sample. And finally, there will be an application fee of between $50 to $150 per application. Okay, so one thing that you want to think about when you're choosing universities is how your academic profile compares to the other applicants. And how will the universities measure you up as a potential colleague and student? So things you want to consider are your grades, so your UK qualifications, your test scores, so the US admissions scores, what your research will be, or what your dissertation was as part of your undergraduate degree. Do you have any work experience? So some programs like the MBA, this is very important, and other programs, it might not be so important. Universities are looking for that X factor. So that's anything that will make you stand out to determine if you will be accepted or if you will be a competitive applicant for funding. Now, as an international student, you might actually have a really unique undergraduate program already. So you might be able to make a strong case as to why you would bring something unique to their program as well. And they're looking for an interesting mix of ideas and people on the program as well. So keep that in mind when you're doing your research and you're putting your application together as well. So I talked about admission tests, and I just want to talk a little more in depth about the admission exams, as I mentioned those a few times already. So admissions tests act as a method of evaluation due to the lack of national curriculum in the US. So it's used to level out the playing field a little to compare students. Now, there are a few different exams that are available, and this is depending on what you want to pursue on the postgraduate level. So the most common one is the GRE, so that's the graduate record exam. And this measures your verbal reasoning, your quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. Now, the GRE is the exam that most master's programs ask for, but it's not always going to be required. But if it is, it's usually going to be the GRE. There's also the GMAT. So this is used for MBA programs or business programs. There's the LSAT, which is used for JD programs, but not for LLM law. Instead, for that, they actually require first degree in law. And then you also have the MCAT. This is for MD programs, so for medical admissions. Now, in terms of these exams, these are actually quite different to what we're used to in the UK. They're multiple choice and they have a very strict time limit. There's some examples online that you could get, and you might be able to take some of them to practice as well. Now, in terms of how important they are in the admission decisions, so this depends. Some universities might not require them at all. And for others, it actually might be a big factor into their decision. However, they will be interested in your personal statement and your transcript as well, and your application as a whole. And it also could be that some programs will be more interested in just a part of your admission test. So things like analytical writing or verbal reasoning scores. And or maybe they might look at how you did on the quantitative reasoning section of the exam. So this really just depends university to university and program to program. Now, to ensure that you take the appropriate test and to confirm that you need to take the test at all, check the website of each university to which you plan to apply to. And pay close attention to the university's application deadline. Make sure that you plan your exams accordingly. So the university will usually list the deadline where the exam results need to be submitted by. So make sure you plan your exam accordingly to meet those deadlines. Make sure that you register early for those exams, and it gives you an option to retake them if necessary. And make sure that you properly prepare for them. There's a lot of free prep materials online, as well as an option to actually buy study guides for these exams. And since COVID, there's a lot of these exams are as accessible as possible, and you could take the GRE at home and also the GMAT online. There's an online exam as well. Okay, so let's talk about more in depth about the personal statement. The personal statement is one of the most important parts of the application process. So this isn't like your UCAS personal statement. This is actually an opportunity to showcase what you could bring to the university. So it's not an in-depth research proposal. Some universities may ask for a separate research statement outline, which outlines your research interests and your future plans, but that will be separate from the personal statement. Some universities may also ask for essay on a specific topic instead of a statement, and others may ask you to address something specific. So make sure that you check the requirements carefully. Now, these statements will help reveal individuals' character, motivation, things like future goals and interest in that particular university, program, or field. And since there is usually no set structure for writing a personal statement, you actually have the opportunity to be as creative as you want to be and to make yourself stand out as much as possible. Now, some students choose to start with an anecdote describing how they became interested in a particular field of study, and others use a central theme to link and describe their experiences and what their future plans for their studies and career are. Make sure that you're not modest. This is the time to sell yourself as an applicant. We have a lot more tips on how to write a good personal statement on our website, and we actually include examples of successful personal statements that you could download and have a look at as well. Okay, so you will also be required to submit letters of recommendation, and universities will ask to gather between 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. Make sure that you ask a variety of people that know you well. Like I mentioned before, the university may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. They might ask for a letter from an academic or professional referee. But if you do have multiple academic referees to choose from, make sure that you choose someone who knows you well, like I mentioned before, both in and out of the classroom. So they could highlight those characteristics that you have. Make sure that you choose referees that will complement your application as well. And they will also complement each other's reference so that you have a good balance of both classroom or professional setting, research, and also extracurricular activities as well. You could actually meet with your referee to discuss the letters, so it's always helpful to give a copy of your application, maybe even transcript or a CV to your referee. And you could tell them the reasons for doing a postgraduate degree in the US, or your chosen field or your interest in that particular university that you've selected, or even things like your future goals and why you chose that university. Make sure that your referees also aware of any deadlines and paperwork they might need to complete. The letters are actually a great marketing tool for you as an applicant. You can make suggestions for the content of the letter, but it's very important that you do not see the letter before it gets sent off to the university, and that's just to maintain your credibility. You can direct referees to mention things like your ability to succeed at the postgraduate level, if they made any observations about your performance. Maybe they've made observations about your ability to positively contribute to the university, or maybe you have leadership abilities or a great character. Or maybe they might want to just mention your passion for your subject of choice. Now, above all else, make sure that you encourage your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. So American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone, and they use very positive and descriptive language. And they discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom as well. So bear in mind what will be written about your American counterparts when you prepare your UK referees to write their letters. So this isn't the time for them to be modest. It's the time to boast about you. So now I'd like to talk about other ways that we could help. If you haven't already visited our website for advice, we have a lot of information, different guides and information about events. Under Education USA advice, you can find information about postgraduate study in the USA with more details on choosing, funding, and applying. And in our programs section, you could find details about the Fulbright Awards and each award category, what the benefits are, the selection criteria, and what the application procedures are like as well. You could also book a one-to-one video appointment with an advisor or email us. So the one-to-one video appointments are on our contact page, on the contact section of our page. And you could email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk. So that's advising@fulbright.org.uk. We also host and we attend various events throughout the year, both virtually and in person. And you could find a list of our upcoming events on our event page. Okay, so that's it for the webinar. Thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. And like I said, the webinar will be available to access later this week. Thank you. Have a good evening.